once you get up at a certain point in the organization, people assume you're like, you got it, right? Like no one's going to tell you to go out and grow and develop and learn and stretch yourself when you're a VP. Sorry to say, once you get to a certain level, people stop caring about your personal development. So that's the point at which I have to care about it.
Welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Hello, and welcome to episode 51. This week, we are talking to Jen Swanson, Vice President of Digital Product Management at Optum, about the importance of networking both outside and inside your organization. And we also talk about why you, me, and everyone else should be always working on their negotiation skills and how it impacts your career. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that I'm available to speak at your organization or conference on how to establish a growth mindset. Hit me up at Kurt, that's K-U-R-T, Kurt at FoundryMakes.com to learn more. Speaking of Foundry, head over to FoundryMakes.com to learn more about how we accelerate innovation in companies big and small. That's FoundryMakes.com. And now, on with the show. Jen, thanks for joining me today.
Of course. I'm so happy to be here.
I am super happy that you're here, too. So, currently, you're doing digital product management. You're a VP over at Optum. How did you get involved into this whole space of product and marketing and all of that? Were you going to college and like, this is going to be great. I'm going to run product teams.
Well, no.
No.
Oddly enough, though, I have a minor in journalism, which is almost like marketing. So that's close enough. No, actually, I come to product management by way of a long and winding road that started with an undergraduate degree in English. Mm-hmm. And English majors, we know how to party.
Yes.
So, and actually, I know an awful lot of product people who started as English majors. So I do think that there's something there as a career path, but we can talk about that later. And actually, after my undergraduate work at Iowa State, I went and got my master's in higher ed administration at Colorado State, and I lived and worked in residence halls for several years as a new professional, which is about as exciting as you think it is. And
sounds thrilling.
Right. Well, nothing like being 23 and living in a dorm with a bunch of 18-year-olds.
Yes.
I mean, it's really pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I worked in higher education for really probably the first 10 years of my career or so, including that graduate work. And it was a lot like marketing, but of course it wasn't called marketing, but I did a lot of event planning. So I managed student activities for a couple of years where we had coffee houses back in the day when we had coffee houses in colleges. Yeah, it was very exciting. Lots of acoustic guitar. It was really exciting.
Yeah, I can smell the patchouli.
You can, I'm sure. So it was event planning. It was, a lot of training. I worked with student groups, did advising and training of student groups and things like that. And then I decided I wanted to be a grown-up and live in the grown-ups world. And I still managed to stay in higher education. I worked in alumni relations, donor relations, customer relations, basically any job you can put the word relations by or next to. And I worked at the University of Minnesota for about 5 years doing work with both the Carlson School of Management and the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. And that was a lot of fun. But what I figured out was that I was not creating anything in those organizations. The Alumni Association, when I worked there, had just had its 150th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Which is super awesome, right? An organization that's been around that long.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of new in that.
Just keep the lights on, right?
Well, I was running mentor programs and I wanted to make these big changes. And it was like, no, you can move it about 3 degrees to the left, but that's as far as we're comfortable with. And
you realize we've been around 150 years.
Right, exactly. No sudden movements.
We got a formula here.
Exactly. So, and that was really kind of an aha moment for me, was that I'm a creator. I like blank sheets of paper. I worked with a coach at the time who helped me figure that out about myself. And through the time that I was working in higher education, both at the Carlson School and at the Alumni Association, I was always given the technology projects. And this was pretty early on. So I always tell the joke that my first day at the Carlson School of Management, they handed me this binder. They'd done all this research that they wanted to start an alumni directory. and stop me if you've heard this one before, but they wanted me to build an alumni directory, where alumni could create like profiles of themselves and their job history, and people could search for each other and message each other. And so we built LinkedIn before there was LinkedIn. And if I had known we had built LinkedIn, I would not be sitting here with you.
Right. But we different story.
They handed me this binder and they said, we want to build this. And I had done 1 year in my early career working for a software training company. And since I had a job with the word software somewhere in the title, they assumed I knew everything about technology. So I didn't, but I knew how to ask questions. I was really curious, and I had a lot of fun figuring out how to build stuff, and had good partners, good IT partners. And that was really kind of my first taste in the product sphere. Nobody called it product management, but I was a product manager.
Yeah, great.
Lots of negotiation with our with the University of Minnesota Foundation, who owned all of the alumni data. And we were like, no, trust us. Just give us the data. We're not going to do anything bad with it,
No.
And so
you're not doing anything with it.
That's right.
So just give it to us.
Just give it to us. So lots of negotiation, sort of creating things from blank space. And it was a lot of fun. And that really kind of got me hooked. After I worked at the U for a while, I went on to work at Capella for 8 years, Capella University. They hired me as an alumni director, which I knew I was going to be bored with in about 3.5 minutes, but I really wanted to get in the door there. It was a very innovative company. They were just about to go public, so it was a really great time at Capella, and it was a big risk. Online university. I still remember my dad asked, "Are you sure? Like, are they going to be here in 6 months?" I said, "Dad, trust me, this is going to be okay."
Yeah, it's going to be good.
And it was. And I spent 8 years there working all over the place. I worked in marketing. I did brand advocacy, helped build out their referral admissions pipeline, right? Sure. I worked in customer service delivery for a while. I did some operations work, and that was where I got my first taste of customer experience design. We had done a future state project where we brought IDEO in, and so I was fortunate enough to get trained in customer experience design and design thinking by IDEO, which is sort of amazing.
Sort of amazing.
Yeah. And I kind of wandered into that. I had a VP ask me in the hallway one day, "Hey, do you want to work on this project on customer experience design?" And I had to go back to my desk and Google what it was because I'd never heard of it before. So I did that for 8 years. And then I left Capella and I went to Children's Hospitals and Clinics in Minnesota for a couple of years to lead their digital marketing platform. And that was really where I think I started figuring out that it was the product that I was most engaged by, not the channel, right? So I've always been very curious about technology, very interested in how technology as a tool can help us do our work, live better lives, all of it. But I always thought that meant that I wanted to be in digital marketing. But once I ran a digital marketing team, I said, "Oh, no. That's
different.
That's not the stuff I like. I like the building of the platform." And when I was at Children's, we replatformed their 3,500. Well, it started as a 7,000 page website. When I was done with it, we got it down to 3,500. It's a very content heavy site, lots of architecture, but worked with internal and external partners to reorganize everything, replatform everything, redesign everything. In 2014, made it a mobile responsive website. So brought it into the 21st century,
Right. Yep.
And that was the most fun I have ever had in my career. I mean,
It's a big challenge.
Totally. And it was a big internal challenge, tons of change management, getting physicians to let you do stuff to their content and their pages was a huge challenge, but it was so worth it. And I'm still, every once in a while I pull up the site because I have kids, I take them to Children's and I look at it and I think, "Oh, I did that." We did that. And it was a great experience. And then I ended up at Optum about 2 years ago I got hired ostensibly to create a digital product operating model, right? So both myself and my boss came in at the same time. We combined two teams that had been product-ish, but really to put into place how we were going to run digital product operationally within the organization, within a shared service part of the organization. And I've been there 3 years.
Yeah. That's great. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier about you had a coach early on that helped you with kind of figuring out where you should be focused. Was that something you sought out, or was that something that kind of was provided to you? How did that happen?
I did seek it out. I did. I had a very challenging relationship with my boss at that particular stage of my career.
I see.
And it was a very difficult work environment, and I was not doing so well, frankly.
Right.
You know,
Totally understood.
I was coming home and crying a lot.
Yeah.
And so I decided I didn't really want to live my life that way. And actually my dad, his name is Tom Gelbman. He's kind of a rock star. He has been CIO or CIO for hire at most of the law firms in town here. So any of the law firm people are listening, give them a shout out. So my dad's been in law technology his whole career, and he had been working with a coach. And at that time, it was not like you could just well, first of all, there was no LinkedIn yet. So you couldn't go and find a coach, right?
Right.
And so I asked my dad, I said, tell me about this coach you're working with. And he said, well, you should just go meet with her. And I did. And we clicked. And I hired her. So then for about 2 years, she coached me and my dad at the same time, which I thought was always really kind of interesting. Two very different. I was very early in my career. My dad was much more senior. We never talked about it to each other.
No,
It was just
sure. Probably best.
You know, it was like therapy, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I sought it out. I paid for it. It was my work therapy, really was what it was. And she helped me figure out, first of all, coping mechanisms for how to get through the day-to-day, right? And not give up myself in that, right? To really be able to show up, do my best work, and not let it get to me quite so much. So that was half of the work we did. And the other part then was to say, that's not the long-term strategy here, right? So unless the manager's going somewhere, and that wasn't happening, maybe you need to think about going somewhere. But at that point, I was so sort of bruised and battered that I couldn't even think about what I was going to do next, right? Or what I wanted out of a career.
Yeah, it's very draining.
Right. And I had also sort of come to the end of of this higher ed thing, or traditional higher ed thing. I was starting to realize that was maybe, it didn't feel like, I was looking around and not finding things I was interested in, right? I was feeling stuck. And Rita really helped me. Her name is Rita Webster. She's still coaching. She's fantastic.
Shout out to Rita.
Shout out to Rita. She really helped me sort of through a lot of exercises, a lot of journaling, a lot of just talking. Figuring out when I was at my best, when did I feel that flow? When did I really get juiced up about my work? What were the things I was working on? What was the circumstances of the work? What was literally the physical environment of the work, everything. And starting to notice themes. And this was over about 6 months that we worked together. And it really was kind of an aha moment to say, you are most frustrated when you are managing at the margins, and you are most engaged when you are creating things out of whole cloth. So let's find a job that is about creating things out of whole cloth. And literally weeks later, I got connected to Capella, and they had never had an alumni director before, and they needed someone to create an alumni program. And I went,
scratch.
Hey, I know how to do alumni, and they want me to start it from scratch. That sounds perfect. And history.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I do a lot of coaching with folks, and what I've learned is there's two types of people in the world. There's people who need a coach and people who don't know they need a coach.
That's so true.
And my goal has been to really help coach people around kind of those soft skills, the squishy parts of what leadership and getting stuff done really means. So for you, as you've grown in your career, you have a lot of people on your teams and things. Is that something you also promote, that they should go out and get coaches if they're struggling? Is this something that you're kind of an advocate for now? Well,
what I'm an advocate for is people taking charge of their own career. So I like your perspective. I'm not sure I quite agree with it. Because I believe I've needed coaches at points in my career. I think everybody needs coaches or mentors or people to help them at different points of their career, but they don't need the same thing at every point, right? And so that's always a little bit different. But the one thing I do advocate for my people, but just I do a ton of networking and connecting with people too, is that nobody cares about your career as much as you do. So if you're waiting for someone to, like, your fairy godmother to show up and say, bibbidi bobbidi boo, here's your dream job, you're going to be waiting for a long time, because that is not how this works, right? That you have to make it happen. And so if what you need to make that happen is some training, then let's get you some training. If what you need to make that happen is a coach to figure out what you want and how you want it, then let's figure out how to get you a coach. Is it a book to read? Is it, there's a spectrum for me. And so when I have development conversations with people, those are what they are. It starts with, what do you want? And if you don't know the answer to that, then let's figure out how to help you get an answer.
Sure.
And then we'll figure out how to get you to the answer, right?
Yeah, right.
And so that's something that I take really seriously with my people, but I don't do it for them.
Yeah, you're there to support, right?
Right. And to come up with ideas and give some nudges, or to say, hey, you're, you think that, earlier in my career, back when I was working at the U, I had an office manager reporting to me, and she was in her early 20s. It was a perfect job for her, right? She was still figuring out what she wanted to do. And she came to me and she said, I've decided that what I really want to do is become a librarian. And I know I have to go back to school for that, but one of the things I have to do is be able to manage budgets. Because if I'm going to be a librarian, I'm not just going to be any librarian. I'm going to be the head librarian. And if I'm the head librarian, then I have to manage the library resources. And I've never done that before. And I don't even know how to do that. And so I said, all right, well, I hate doing budgets, so why don't you help me with my budgets?
Right.
And we can learn it together, right? And we can figure it out together, and you can get the experience, and I can get help with something I really don't like to do. And this is a win-win conversation.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Having somebody that's paying attention is really important. Somebody that does give you that nudge or checks in and says, how are you doing on that?
Yeah.
Because again, to
accountability.
Having somebody there to help you with accountability, because if you are this person who is I know I do better when I know people are paying attention. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I started this show in the first place, is that this is a great way for me to get free consulting from people. And, but I have to hit that publish button every week, or whenever I take time off from the show. But it's that accountability of the hundreds and hundreds of people that listen to this show, that they're waiting for this information, right?
It doesn't drop. Someone's going to send you an email.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So for me, that's what I found really helpful in my career when I was younger, was having that person, that leader, or somebody I respected that was just paying attention to my growth.
Yeah. And, there have been times in my career where I haven't had anyone above me paying attention that way, but I've gone out and figured out how to create it, right? Or find it elsewhere. I currently have a group of women that I meet with on a monthly basis, and we call each other the mastermind group, right? And they are my accountability partners. We're all senior level women, to the point where, once you get up at a certain point in the organization, people assume you're you got it, right? No one's going to tell you to go out and grow and develop and learn and stretch yourself when you're a VP. Sorry to say, once you get to a certain level, people stop caring about your personal development. So that's the point at which I have to care about it, right? That's not to say that my leadership doesn't care about my growth and development, but it's different, right? Different. And so I've had to go out and say, I know how I want to grow and develop. I know, at this point, God, I know what I'm not good at. And I know some of the things I'm not good at, I don't have to be good at, right? Yeah. Some of the things I'm not good at, I have to get better at. And so how do you create a community for yourself of accountability and growth, and people who will stretch you, people who will not just nod and smile when you say something, but say, I'm sorry, Jen, but I'm going to have to call you on that BS, and someone who will check in with you to say, hey, you said you were going to, take that course, or you were going to read the book, you were going to have that really hard conversation. What happened? And if you haven't had it, why the hell not?
When I first got into a more higher management role, I think I was a little too insular. I thought those answers were going to come from inside the organization, right? And so what I did was I was like, well, my boss isn't giving me any growth opportunities, so I guess I'm just stuck. It took me quite a lot longer than I would have wished it would have to realize those answers are outside the doors of the place I'm in.
Right. Right. And I think that insularity is really easy.
It is. It's
really
cheap.
easy.
And it's cheap and easy.
And I think one of the things, too, that people typically go through the process of, like, they network like crazy, they get a new job, they immerse themselves in their new job, and they immediately stop talking to anyone, right? And they wake up 12, 18, 24 months later and go, oh, shit. A reorg's coming, something else is coming. So then they ramp back up on the networking. And in the meantime, they have only known what's going on in product or technology or project management inside their own company.
Yeah.
They haven't gone to any meetups. They haven't, they just stopped talking to people. I mean, they maybe went and had a couple happy hours here and there, but it wasn't an active development. And so it becomes this like accordion, right? It's either out or it's in, out or in, you know? Whereas I think the people that have that growth mindset, which I know you talk a lot about on the show, the growth mindset where, sure, the volume might decrease as you get into a new role. There's a lot to learn.
Yep.
We only have so much mental and emotional space to take in new information when we're in that phase of our work. But if you can keep a steady drumbeat, sort of, or a base level, of connection to a broader community, that it's much easier when those constriction points come, where you go, oh, crap.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble, or I lost my job, or I think I'm going to lose my job, or I'm very unhappy in my job, or I need a change, or I'm burnt out. You don't have to spend all that energy ramping back up and reconnecting and refiguring out what you're doing because you've kept up along the way.
Yeah.
And I think that viewing networking less as a means to the next project, gig, job, whatever, but more as how are you taking in the inputs of what everyone else in your community is doing? Mm-hmm. What do you have going on? What problems are you solving? Oh, that's really interesting. That's just like this problem over here that this other company's solving. Do you guys know each other? You should talk to each other. Those kinds of connections, first of all, are highly satisfying when you are in the throes of a job where maybe you aren't making a ton of traction. You can have satisfaction someplace else because you're making these other connections and you're a part of something bigger. And it can make that easier to get through when you're in those kind of moments at work. And I think that's been the approach I've taken with the idea of networking, is that it's a constant for me because I love that input. I love you have the podcast. I do breakfast and lunches like a champ, right? Because I just want to know, well, what are you working on?
Right.
And how are you solving that problem? Because that sounds an awful lot like a problem I have, and maybe I could take the same approach.
Yeah. I found earlier on in my career when I would network with, especially with people I used to work with, I would get really excited because I'd be like, oh, these are people I learned a lot from and working with and everything. But we just end up falling into talking about old work.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah. But if you can get out and you can meet with new people, right? Or you can go to an event that you don't know anyone at, which is really hard to do, but go and say, I've never been to this particular meetup and I'm going to go.
But Jen, why do these people want to talk to me? That I don't have anything interesting to say.
Oh, everybody has something interesting to say. I mean, you are alive on this planet. Are you telling me you don't have one interesting thing to say? I just think that, it's also okay sometimes to just go listen then.
Another tactic is those networking and meetup groups is when you go, a lot of times I see people, they'll go with coworkers.
And they won't talk to anyone new.
Yeah, that happens. But I think, again, it goes back to that. Maybe I don't feel like I provide as much value as I probably actually do, right? And so my coworkers see my value, so it's more comfortable to talk with them, right?
Listen, I have this rule with my kids. I make them go to museums. We just took a road trip to South Dakota for MEA weekend for fall break. They love to go to the gift shop. They're not so interested in the learning. And
gift shops are great. Right. Museums. The one at MEA is amazing.
Believe me, we are well traveled in the gift shop area with my family. I have two boys, 7 and 10, and they love the gift shop, especially the Lego section. There's always a Lego section. So I know. But the rule I have is we can't go to the gift shop until they can tell me 3 facts that they've learned. And if they come to me together, they can do it with 5 facts, but then they have to work together. So they can discount 1 fact if they work together. Can you tell I'm a product manager? How can we get, what are the incentives here? Right. So what I would say, because everyone I ever have this conversation with about networking is it's so easy for you because you're so outgoing.
Right.
Here's the thing though. I am outgoing, but it takes all of my energy. I will probably have to go have a 3-hour nap after this conversation, right? And so sometimes I have to talk myself into it, right? And so if you set a goal and say, okay, I'm going to talk to 3 new people and then you can leave. I will tell you that there have been times where I go in, I talk to 3 people on my way to the bar. I get a glass of wine. I enjoy that glass of wine, and then I leave without talking to anyone else. And I'm like, I've done the bare minimum.
Yeah.
But you know what? I've talked to those 3 people. And the best example of this was I went to an event, a MIMA event once years ago, and I was just not feeling it. And it was a morning event, and it was really cold outside. And I got my coffee and my donut, and I stood at one of the little stand-up tables, and I literally was like, I can't talk to anyone else. And I felt like people were like kind of approaching me with like the handshake. And I was like, I can't do it. So there was this woman standing next to me. And I said, look, I am not having a very good morning. I need to stand here and not engage. And so is it okay if I stand here with you? She was like, oh my God, I feel the same way. So that person is now one of my dearest friends. She's in my mastermind group. Nice. We have forged our friendship, decades long friendship, over the fact that neither of us wanted to talk to anyone else. Yeah. So you never know where that stuff is going to come from.
Even at your lowest feeling, you found one of them.
I made one of the most meaningful connections of my life.
That's great. Right. I love that story.
Yeah.
What if I feel stuck? Like, I don't know anybody outside of either people I work with or people I've worked with before. Where do I start? Is it just go to an event and talk to people?
Well, that's one way to do it.
That is one way.
So going to events, and not just your usual events, right? Like getting out of your comfort zone, I guess is the way to say it. So I love meetups because they're so casual, and everybody is going into it with about the same level of expectations, right? I mean, for God's sake, it's called a meetup, right? Right. It's not called prepare slides, Right. Although, I mean, some of them are more sophisticated, and somebody usually comes with slides. But I'm just saying that generally speaking, these are easier things to do. And that's a really good way to do it. And setting a number for yourself. Maybe it's not 3. Maybe you're starting with just 1.
Sure.
I think the other big thing that I have found is, who else do you know that I should talk with? And I think there are people in this world that are sort of power connectors. You may not meet one of those right away, but if you keep at it, you will.
Yeah.
Just this morning, I had breakfast with somebody who I met through one of those power connectors that I have in my life. Somebody was introduced me to, I can't even tell you at this point, 25, 30, 40 people. And she's so funny because when you talk to her, she's like, you need to talk to this person and this person and this person. And I write it down, and dutifully she makes the introductions. In all of those introductions, I've maybe had 1 or 2 duds where I was like, I wonder what she saw in us.
Yeah.
I thought we might have something in common. But the rest of them have been like, oh, that's really interesting. That's what you're doing. I'm doing this thing that's totally different. And yet kind of the same. So how could we work together, or how could I help you? And I think that technique, I ask that question at almost every meeting I have, is this is what I'm working on, or this is what I do, or this is what I'm interested in. Who else do you know that's interested in those things? No one? Okay, cool. Thanks. Right. Just thought I'd ask.
Well, if I run into somebody, I'll let you know.
Right. And sometimes I've made it a habit then on my end, too, when I'm talking to people, to say, that's really interesting. I know someone else. Would you like to meet them? And the relief that washes over people's face, and they say, yes, I would like to meet them. And then it's a simple email introduction, and they might have coffee, or they might talk by phone or whatever. Great, off you go. But then being able to help make those connections, I think, is also very gratifying.
That's good. So switching gears, but not really, to product management a little bit. Being a good product manager is sometimes you have to have those internal networking skills.
Oh, yes.
My question to you, Jen, is do you use the same skills that you network outside for your personal gratification and growth? Do you do the same thing, the same techniques internally? Because there's usually not meetups in your company, right?
No.
So how do you go about doing that internal networking? Let's say I'm maybe I'm a couple months in, right? I'm starting to get the hang of what this place is, what it does, who my boss is, what their expectations are. but I don't know what those groups over there do or those groups over there do.
Well, so here's why I laugh, because I'm a big West Wing fan. And there's in the first season, Josh Lyman walks around and he says, I'm wandering around looking for a pickup meeting, right? Like he's just wandering around the West Wing. He doesn't have anything to do. So he's just going to like find a meeting he can show up to. And I love that idea, because that is what I have always done in like my first 6 months in any job, is just whose meetings can I go to, right? I just want to sit and listen to what you're talking about. You don't have to put me on the agenda. It'd be nice if you introduced me at the beginning so I could see who everyone else is. And especially at some place like Optum, where so much of what we do is we've got a very, very distributed workforce, right? Yeah. And we're heavy users of WebEx. So I can have had deep and meaningful conversations with people by phone, and then show up at a meeting and hear their voice and go, "Oh my God,
that's you!
You're Ted. Ted, I'm Jen."
Remember?
You know, and so, but those face-to-face meetings or those introductions are really helpful. But really, just to be able to listen to what people are working on, and I don't think that is only applicable in your first 6 months. It can be you're on a new project or whatever. Is can I come? Can I listen in, can I be on the Scrum call? Can I listen into your stand-ups? Can I come to your staff meeting? Like, I need to immerse myself in the work that you do so that I can understand how I fit in with it. So I think that's one way to do it. And United Health Group is a highly matrixed organization. And the nature of the work that I do within the consumer experience team is I work with lines of business all across the enterprise. And not just within Optum. I work with UHC as well. And the networking skills absolutely are transferable. It is the same thing. So right now we're going through discovery on a new product, and I'm saying, who else is working on this that you know? Because oftentimes in a large enterprise, you've got a good idea pops up at the same time in like 3 or 4 different places.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And because it's a large enterprise, not one person has line of sight to all of those things to say, hey, you're working on this, you're working on this, you're working on this, and you're working on this. Let's pull it together. So sometimes I have to be that person and say, okay, that's really interesting that's how you're looking at that problem. We talked to these people over here, and they're looking at the problem from a totally different angle, and all of a sudden light bulbs go on. And then that first group says, oh, hey, but you know what? If we talk to this other group, they're thinking about it from yet another angle. And all of a sudden you're starting to see a bigger picture. And so I oftentimes will end meetings with, you guys know anyone else who's working on stuff like this?
Right. Have you talked to anybody?
Have you talked to anyone else? And sometimes people will say no. Sometimes they'll come up with a team or a person I've never heard of. And
go 4 years ago, there was Bill and Sally in this room.
Yeah. And the whiteboard's probably still up, so we could go look at it.
That's good. Yeah, I think most organizations, especially large ones, they struggle with portfolio management like that because it can be so dispersed and things can look so different. Yes. But they are the same, right? Yeah. And things like that. And then a lot of it comes into like that team's personal opinion about what the thing is and how to go about it, right?
Yep. And I work more on capabilities than I do on true products that get sold, right? I work on the stuff that makes the products work, right? Yeah. And so oftentimes the things that we're working on really are a specific functionality that could appear on literally hundreds of products. And so it's a very real possibility that those capabilities have been thought of somewhere else. So I can spend 6 months with my team and all the blank whiteboards we want, or we can go figure out, well, they tried it this way on this product and then ended up having to scrap it because of these complications. And someone else had tried it and had more success, but then the product got sunset and so they didn't use it. So, but here's some code you could take. Yeah. That kind of stuff happens, I think, even in smaller organizations, right? Where it's the building blocks of digital experiences get picked up by different teams at different times. And if you just always assume you're the only one working on things, like you're missing out on institutional knowledge that could make you go faster, further, whatever.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, though, is when in a matrix organization, even in smaller ones that are pseudo-matrixed, and a lot of that comes not from structure, but just from job title sometimes, where it's like, you're that, and I'm this,
And therefore, we cannot work on the same things.
Exactly.
Right.
Or because you're that, you call it this. We're doing the same thing, and we call it this.
Oh, yes.
And the nomenclature issue becomes pretty real, especially in the larger organizations that I've had the pleasure to work with, is that sometimes you're arguing over
semantics.
Semantics.
Yep.
And that's when you go home and you're like...
You beat your head against the wall for a few hours.
I'm going to drink this entire bottle of wine and deep dish pizza, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
But how do you, Jen, like, what are ways that have, when you've run into those roadblocks with those other teams, I'm guessing when you find that maybe other people are solving the same problem or similar problem, one that brushes up against that same problem in multiple ways, I can't imagine they're always welcoming to say, like, no, of course, we could be totally wrong. Let's talk to other people about how we could do this better. What are some ways that you found that work to kind of, because you got to imagine walking in there and being like, what are you doing? Like,
well, sure.
It's not going to work, right?
Yeah. And I mean, flattery will get you everywhere.
Oh.
So I could be very charming. Do not underestimate the power of charm. And positive intent. I mean, I'm joking, but I'm also kind of not.
No, I get it.
Like, I feel like there's about 1,000 examples of that happening in the last, 3 years that I've been in this job. And I can't think of one that didn't benefit from me coming in and saying, hey, I really am excited to know that you worked on this. And even though it didn't go well, I want to know all about it, because people take their work seriously, right? So if you've got a team that is territorial, some of it is like, hey, we really fought hard over this.
Yeah.
I have got blood, sweat, and tears in this thing. And, 2 years of my life and half a head of gray hair. And it didn't work, and it didn't feel good, or it didn't go where I wanted to. And now you're going to come in and save it,
Right.
I've been on the receiving end of that.
Sure.
As well as on the swooping inside of things.
Right.
And I can't think of one example where it didn't work for me to say, first, tell me about it. Right? So you're acknowledging and sort of giving voice to that very personal experience for that individual or that team or whatever, and whatever problems or emotions they have around it, and say, tell me about it. What did you learn? What do you wish you could have done differently? And then to say, we, and I use we a lot. Women are not supposed to use the word we, because it is, we're not supposed to go into our performance reviews and say, we did this and we did this and we did this. But I'm a huge believer of we, because I didn't do anything. I don't code. Right.
Right. I get it.
But we together could take this thing that you built and give it life again, or give it new life, or give it bigger life, or give it exposure, and give you credit for the hard work you did. And then how do we together position it and pivot it and move it forward? Now, it's not always that clean, and not everyone always ends up singing Kumbaya, but I will tell you that that creates more space for constructive conversations than coming in and saying, this is what I want to do with the thing that you built.
Right. Yes. First I'm going to tear this down,
right,
and then I'm going to tear that down.
I have a lot of movie references and TV references, but it's like Frank in Father of the Bride, where he walks into the house and he says, beautiful, gorgeous. We change everything.
You change everything. Yeah, exactly. There's two sort of attitudes. There's one is like, well, I don't like those people. I don't like it's sales. Damn sales, the people who keep us have jobs.
Right, exactly.
but I don't like it because they're doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. And so you want me, Jen, to walk in there and be like, hey, tell me about what you did. Why did you tell the client it could do these things?
Tell me more.
How do I do that when I'm already feeling like under attack?
It's really hard. And a little therapy with your boss or a coworker can help, where you get it out of your system. But I do think that going in with positive intent, assuming positive intent, always is a good idea. So, hey, sales, I'm so excited that we made this big client land. That's super awesome. Caught wind that maybe we promised some things that the product doesn't do. I have some heartburn around that, but I want to talk to you about it. So let's talk.
Okay.
What was it? What was the client telling you that led to that assertion or promise? is there wiggle room? Does it have to be delivered exactly how you said? Because actually, what you said is technically impossible. I'm going to need 3 years and about $12 million to be able to make that happen. But if the intent, right, was to be able to increase enrollment or to improve, shorten wait times or whatever it is, we could do it this other way. Do you think the client would be open to that? Because that I can deliver next quarter. Right? And then it becomes a negotiation. And I really think product management is negotiation and coalition building 90% of the time.
Yeah, but the problem is that those are not skills that we're taught.
No, they're not.
Where do we learn those skills? Like, for myself, I went through the typical journey of reading all the books that tell you, right? Like, leaders eat last and blah, 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 and all this stuff.
That's your first mistake. Don't read the books.
Yeah, that was the mistake, is because I would try to replicate some of these things that were very broad, not very specific to my situation, and they wouldn't stick. So where should I start?
Where do you learn all that?
Yeah.
Oh, I wish I had an easy answer.
There is no easy answer.
There is no easy answer. But I do think it's got to be, I'm an information junkie, right?
Yeah.
So podcasts, totally my jam. About 5 or 6 years ago, I realized I was not a good negotiator. I'd never negotiated a salary before, just always took whatever anyone gave me. And I was like, thank you.
Right. Appreciate that.
Hadn't negotiated to buy a car, hadn't negotiated anything. Found a podcast, a 3-part podcast on negotiation skills, listened to it, and was like, okay. And then the next time I was faced with a negotiation, I didn't whip out my notebook.
Yeah, sure. Right.
And be like, step one.
Uno momento, please. Do you...
But I used a little technique that had stuck with me, and I was like, okay, well, that works. Got a little bit more of what I wanted. Okay, so next time I'm going to do that, and I'm going to pair it with this other thing. And I think that's what experience is, right? It is your life of having tried things in small micro experiments, figuring out what works and doesn't work. When you walk into that meeting and you're like, beautiful, gorgeous, we change everything, right? And that doesn't work for you.
Right.
Probably not going to do that the next time.
Right.
But you learn something and you move on. That's where I think also failure or bad meetings, always feel so awful. Like, when you just have one of those meetings where things could not have gone worse. You say some word that is a hot button for someone else, and all of a sudden there's like shouting and, not shouting. Yeah, nobody really shouts, but but there's like shouting with the eyes.
Yes. Yeah, I've been in those meetings.
And emphatic hand gestures, and you can tell this is not going well, right? And I used to walk out of those meetings and just think, oh my God, I'm such a failure. I'm like, I couldn't get that got away from me or whatever. And my mom has always been one to be like, okay, you need to give it the test. Is it going to matter in 5 years? 1 year? Is it going to matter next week?
Right.
Let's put this in some perspective. And so then the next time you go into that meeting with those people, maybe you're not going to say the hot button words, or you're going to go to that person and say, hey, that meeting did not go the way I wanted to. Can we talk about it?
Yeah.
And a good sense of humor and assuming positive intent always works.
Yeah.
It's always worked for me. Now a lot of people will say, intentions aren't the same as impact, and, people have to be accountable for not just what they intended to have happen, but what actually happened. But if you can assume the positive intent and you can say, okay, something went wrong between the positive intent and the impact of my words or your words or anything else like that, then that gives you a place to start to examine, right? I'm not going back and saying, boy, that Kurt's a real a-hole, right? I'm saying, okay, so I don't think Kurt meant to make me feel that way in that meeting. And yet something happened between his intent to have a perfectly rational meeting and what happened. So let's look at that. And it gives you a much better space to be able to work out the details.
Yeah. And I think, though, internally, I think that's why networking is so important, because there's reputations in organizations where you hear about that. That CMO is kind of a jerk. And then you go to the meeting and you assume they're going to be a jerk. Right?
And then you let the CMO be a jerk, right? Because you give them space to be the jerk versus being able to have a relationship with someone and not assuming he's a jerk. Maybe he really is a jerk, but go and find out, right? Go have a conversation. And I think the more you can have personal conversations with people when things go off the rails, right? Whether it be, you coach sales to say, okay, you really can't make those promises anymore. And they go out and they sell another, widget
right.
with those promises to go back and say, hey, I thought we had talked about this. Right. And you're not coming at them attacking because you have a relationship there. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really hard in big organizations to have enough relationships of enough depth. Right. We only have so much time. But if you can start to think about what your sort of spheres that you need to move in, prioritize where you're making those relationships, make sure you have sufficient depth of relationships. And I'm not just talking about like golfing or going to get beers or whatever. I mean, it can just be work related. Like, I don't think you have to have extracurricular relationships with everybody you work with, right? And that can get really fraught too, especially when gender dynamics come into play too, because that can be very uncomfortable in some circumstances. It's what led us to Me Too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff fraught there. Yeah. But I think it's entirely possible to have really good relationships inside of work that are about the work, but that also say, hey, Kurt, I know you. I trust you. I know I can come to you with a concern, and you're not going to like fly off the handle. You're going to work with me on it. And the more people you can have that relationship with, the better. So when you hit whatever bump you're going to hit, because you're going to hit them, you've got something to fall back on.
And a larger group of it, right?
Right.
Because like what I've found in the past when people start in a new role, or maybe they're in there for a while, the group that you're around kind of sends warning signals. To say like,
for sure.
See, so QA over there, they think they actually own the product, but they don't. They don't. So when they say this stuff, just say thank you and move on or whatever, right? Like that's hard to break out because you're trying to get your close coworkers and close peers. You're trying to build a relationship with them, and you're trying to grow it into something where they're going to tell your boss, like, "Oh yeah, Sally, she's great. Like she's great. Like because that's what you want, right?
Right.
But that's not how you're going to actually have more impact. The more you stay within that group, the less impact you actually have over time. And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make.
Yeah. And I will say that my best product managers, the people who are the most successful, are those who have a network of their own in the company. Some overlap usually with me because it's just by nature, right? Yeah. But I'm really lucky I have a team now that probably has mapped, more of the organization than I probably would even realize, right? With their relationships, where then we can say, we're having a problem. Who do we know in this area that we can like lean into and understand more about the problem, or more about the drivers of the problem? Because sometimes it's not, the problem is a symptom of a larger issue, right? The problem we're encountering is a symptom of a larger issue, right?
And sometimes when you do not have any optics on, right?
Right. All you see is this one little corner, right? Yeah. And there is a whole bunch of shit behind it. Yep. And it doesn't mean you have to get pulled into that, but you do have to understand it, right? So QA over here thinks they own the product. Well, my first reaction to that is, how awesome. People feeling ownership for something. This is great. We can work with this,
You're a serial optimist.
I am. I'm a very optimistic person.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that people struggle with especially when I'm coaching people around difficult work situations, is going in and assuming positive intent when it's our human nature to mostly assume the negative. I mean, that's how we've survived for a millennia is that we assume that outside the cave is a bear, so we don't leave the cave, right? And that's served us well, right? But in a work situation where we're all supposed to be on the same team, I don't know how many times I've sat in meetings or saying, we're all on the same team, reminding people of that. And it is, I feel like it's a very difficult place. There's a lot of insecurity and that insecurity might not be by that person. It might be their boss has instilled that insecurity in them.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's why I think really focusing, even to a fault sometimes, if you need to be, that positive intent and assuming it is also important for moving forward.
Absolutely. And, I do think, so I'm a very transparent leader, sometimes to my detriment. I have no filter. I have no poker face. So this is good in many regards. It allows me to create really open and honest relationships with the people around me, whether it's the people who report to me, the people I report to, my peers, whatever. So there are benefits to it. There certainly are negatives. But that transparency sometimes can be, so change happens, right? Change happens to you. Change falls down on you, right?
It runs you over.
It's a reorg. It's a, it's a reallocation of resources. It's whatever it is, right? So change is happening. And I have found that if you can develop the relationship you have with your team, you can have a moment of saying, I'm not assuming positive intent right now. I feel burned. I feel pissed off. I'm hungry. I mean, whatever it is, right? Like, I'm not having a good day here. And to rally the team and say, okay, let's think about how we're going to deal with this together, right? Because just because you're in that space doesn't mean everyone else is. And I think that sort of modern management practices are that leaders should never have that kind of transparency, because what you believe or what you cast out then is picked up by your team and they automatically pick it up. But if what you have is a culture of, look, I'm going to process my emotions in real time here, right? And I'm struggling with this. Someone else has the freedom to say, oh yeah, so am I. Someone else can say, hey, there is this bright side we could explore. And after you throw something at them and then you say, well, tell us what that is, and you're like, oh, well, maybe we could think about it that way. And that then I've had many times where my team has brought me along, right? So I can sit here and giggle and laugh and tell funny stories. The reality is there are some days where I'm like, no, I'm not into this. I'm not happy with the way that this is going. I'm upset about this decision, or I'm pissed off at this team because they didn't pick up the work that they needed to. But in that, if you can be authentic about that and sort of create a safe space where then team can come together and say, actually, this creates this other opportunity now that we could pursue. And that glass half full kind of moment, which is usually all I need to turn it around and what most people need to turn it around, right? If you can have that space where you can say, be, the caveman response of, no, I'm not happy about this. I don't want this. I don't, I'm mad at this, or I'm upset about that. I'm frustrated. If you can have that moment, the question is, are you going to wallow in it, or are you going to figure out what to do next? Right. And I think the people I have very little patience for are the people who, regardless of lots of opportunity to shift thinking, to move past anger and frustration, that's a choice, right? That's a choice you can either make or not make. If you're going to consistently not make the choice to move past it, then I don't want you on my team. I don't want you in my life, because wallowing isn't helping anyone. But everyone's got to experience it, right? And then it's what you do with it that matters. Yeah,
it can really bring everybody down, right? And you got to think of, and that's the thing I think as a leader that some people get challenged with. There's the individual, then there's the team. Do I focus on what's good for the team? How do I balance that with what's good for the individual?
Right.
I think you can get fooled sometimes into seeing this person who's really upset and get fooled into thinking, oh, there must be a bigger thing going on here.
They're upset because it's bad for the team.
Yeah, right, exactly, right?
So I should be upset too.
Yes.
Right? Versus it being, no, that's just Jen processing through what she's processing through. And so some of it is your own awareness to say, this is not about the team. This is about me. I'm having my own personal reaction to this right now. I will get past it. I will come up with a better attitude about it tomorrow, or by this afternoon, or in 15 minutes. But right now, I got to just deal with that emotion, and now we're going to move past it, And I've used that with my team for years. My teams over the last few years is to say, okay, let's just get it out. Let's just everybody say what they're really thinking. No judgment, no punishment. Okay, now what are we going to do about it? Where are we going to go? How are we going to get past it? How are we going to turn this around?
Yeah, what I really like what you said, and I think I wish I would have learned earlier, is that I can be super transparent, and I can say that, I make mistakes as a leader, and I can be that person. But what is important is now then create that space for people deliberately that this is where you can have that conversation now. It isn't just about me and because I've had great leaders and piss poor leaders, and a lot of the piss poor leaders, it was not because their intent was bad. I think it was because they were like, no, I have an open door policy. It's like nobody wants to walk in that door. Right? You need to come and provide that space to us. And I think that deliberateness is where some people, at least new to leadership, sometimes fail.
Yeah.
Because they assume that since I told you I'm open and transparent, now
that you'll believe me and that, right.
Yeah, and we're all fine now, right? And so later when you hear that somebody might have a problem with you, and you're like, what? I have an open door policy. How could they have a problem?
How could that be? Right.
Right. You learned, and I went through those sorts of situations. I learned fast. It's like, oh, well, I didn't create a space for them to bring that issue up or in a safe way where they didn't think they were going to get shot out of a cannon.
Right. And it's not always easy. And especially when the demand for that space comes at a time where you are perhaps ill-equipped to provide it, right? We all have our low moments, where it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We are just barely making it through the day kind of a thing.
Right.
That is not the time to create a safe space and have people bring their grievances because you will not receive them well. That being said, my philosophy has always been, bad feelings or frustrations are like water. They're going to flow somewhere, right? Yeah. There are cracks that they can flow into. So you can either create a reservoir to collect them so that you know about them and can deal with them, or you can pretend they don't exist and they're going to flow elsewhere and they're going to cause problems elsewhere, right? And I think the aligning principle to that is, though, that you can't assume just because you've made it a safe space that your team is telling you everything. And as a leader, you do have to get comfortable with the fact that your team's going to talk about you.
Yeah.
And that used to paralyze me. Oh, my God, that made me so uncomfortable.
I know so many people that, even to this day, they just ignore the fact that happens.
Do you know, I managed a team once, and we were using IM, and I'm a Gen, so there's a lot of Gens. And there were a few on our team, and somebody IM'd another Gen about me, and I got it. And it wasn't particularly mean. It was kind of a backhanded compliment, as a matter of fact. It was kind of like, I would never want her job. I don't know how she does it. She deals with so much bullshit. And it was a little bit sharper than that. But it was along those lines. And I read it and I was like, well, I can read this two ways.
Yeah. They think I'm dead inside.
Right. Or I can think, that there's a gratefulness and admiration for somebody who's taken one for the team and protecting them from stuff. And that's how I chose to take it. And from that time on, I realized that they're all talking about me. And I just don't care.
Yeah, I don't care.
Maybe they're saying nice things. Maybe they're saying amazing things. Maybe they're saying I am completely, off the charts crazy and they don't want to work for me anymore. None of it matters.
No.
It's all good.
It is all good.
Yeah. And that person was so mortified. And I was just like, whatever, it's all good.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah. We've all made that mistake.
Right.
We've all messaged the wrong person.
I'll message the wrong Jen.
Okay, Jen, well, we're at time. So I want to thank you for taking the time. I think your perspective on networking and the importance of it, both outside and inside an organization, is really refreshing. And I think a lot of people can learn a lot from the stuff that you had to share today.
Great. It was so fun.
So if people want to connect with you, where are you active? Like, where's a good place to say, hey, Jen, I want to talk to you more about what a mastermind group is and where coffee and where do you want to get breakfast? Where's a good place to reach out to you?
LinkedIn is probably best. And I'm JG Swanson because there are quite a few. Jen Swanson.
Yep.
So yeah, JG Swanson at LinkedIn.
Cool. Well, thank you, Jen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kurt. I had a great time.
Me too. Thank you for listening to The Schmidt List. If you want to learn more about how Foundry accelerates innovation, check out foundrymakes.com. And if you'd like me to speak about establishing a growth mindset at your conference or with your team, drop me a note at kurt@foundrymakes.com. Oh, and the next time you're on the internet, head to iTunes and leave the show a review. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and I hope you have a fantastic week.